3 years together. I didn't notice at first how much I'd started managing, how many small adjustments I was making without even realizing I was making them. It started with managing his moods, learning to read the subtle signs that told me when it was safe to talk and when I should stay quiet. If he came home and went straight to the couch without saying much, that meant he'd had a bad day and needed space. If he was on his phone with that particular focused expression, that meant work stress and I shouldn't interrupt. I learned his patterns, his triggers, his emotional weather system, and I adjusted myself accordingly. Then I started managing our social life. I'd be the one to check our invitations, decide which ones to accept, make excuses when he didn't feel like going somewhere. When friends would invite us to dinner parties or game nights or weekend trips, I'd have to gauge his interest level, present it in the right way, prepare him for the interaction, and then smooth over his quietness or his early departure with everyone afterward. He's just tired, I'd say. Work's been really demanding. I became his social buffer, his interpreter, his excuse maker. I managed his relationship with my family too. Before every visit, I'd prep him, remind him what we'd talked about last time, brief him on current family situations, warn him about topics to avoid. Afterward, I'd explain his quietness to my mom, justify his distraction to my dad, smooth over the moments when he'd seemed disengaged or uninterested. My family started asking if he was okay, if something was wrong, and I'd defend him, explain him, make him more palatable and understandable than he actually was in those moments. I thought this was what good partners did. I thought I was being supportive, understanding, mature, someone who helped their partner navigate the world, who made things easier for them, who created a comfortable space for them to exist in. Every relationship article I'd ever read talked about compromise and accommodation and meeting your partner where they are. So I met him where he was again and again and again, while he never seemed to move toward where I was. The adaptations became so gradual, so invisible, that even I stopped noticing them. I'd stopped listening to certain music in the car because he'd made comments about how annoying it was, how he couldn't stand that particular genre or that artist's voice. At first, I'd just turn it down when he was with me, but eventually I stopped playing it altogether because I'd internalized his preferences as somehow more valid than mine. My playlists changed. My Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year reflected his taste more than mine. I'd stopped cooking foods I genuinely loved because he was picky about textures, flavors, ingredients. The first time I made something he didn't like, he'd pushed it around his plate and said he couldn't eat it, and I'd felt embarrassed, like I'd failed somehow. So I started asking what he wanted before planning meals, adjusting recipes to his preferences, eliminating entire categories of food from my cooking. Mushrooms, onions, anything too spicy, anything he deemed weird. My kitchen became a space where only his palate mattered. I'd stopped sharing certain opinions because they'd lead to him shutting down or getting defensive or starting an argument I didn't have the energy for. Political topics, yes, but also smaller things, thoughts on movies we watched, observations about people we knew, ideas about how we could improve our apartment or our routines. If my opinion differed from his, it was easier to just keep it to myself than deal with the tension. So I started agreeing more, suggesting less, keeping my actual thoughts quiet. My vocabulary changed in ways I didn't even consciously decide. I removed "we need to talk" from my available phrases because those words would make him tense up immediately, get defensive before I'd even said what I needed to say. So I'd try casual mentions instead, bringing things up lightly while we were doing something else, hoping he'd engage without feeling cornered. He never engaged. The casual mentions would float in the air and disappear, unacknowledged, and I'd let them go because at least we'd avoided conflict. I planned everything around his preferences. Where we ate was based on what he was in the mood for. I stopped suggesting places I wanted to try because if he wasn't interested, we wouldn't go, so why bother suggesting? What we watched was what he wanted to watch. He picked the movie or the show and I'd agree, and over time I stopped even considering what I might want to see because my wants weren't part of the equation anymore. Even when we had sex was determined by his interest, his energy level, his readiness. I'd initiate sometimes, early on, but he'd often say he was too tired or too stressed or not in the mood, and I'd feel rejected, awkward, like I'd done something wrong by wanting him. So I stopped initiating. I waited for him to show interest, which became less and less frequent, and I told myself this was normal, that sex drives vary, that I shouldn't take it personally even though it felt deeply personal. My entire tone of voice adapted to his comfort level. I learned to never be too excited because enthusiasm came across as annoying, childish, too much. I learned to never be too sad because emotional heaviness was draining for him, something he didn't have the capacity to deal with. And I learned to never be too demanding because asking for things made me needy, difficult, the kind of girlfriend who required too much effort. So I modulated myself constantly, pleasant but not too happy, fine but not too sad, present but not too needy. Meanwhile, he never asked what I wanted to eat, never suggested activities based on what I might enjoy, never checked if I was okay with his plans before making them. His comfort was the default setting for our entire relationship, and I was the one who made sure everything ran smoothly around it, who anticipated his needs and met them, who adjusted and accommodated and managed so he never had to experience discomfort or compromise or inconvenience. I handled all the emotional labor of the relationship while he coasted. I remembered important dates, sent cards to his family, kept track of our friends' life events, managed our calendar, initiated difficult conversations that went nowhere, processed my own feelings alone, and carried the weight of maintaining connection between us. He showed up and existed, and I made sure his existence was as comfortable and easy as possible, while my own existence became smaller and quieter and more constrained. There were moments I'd catch myself mid-accommodation and think, wait, when did I stop liking this music? Or when did I decide I hated mushrooms? The realization would flicker that I hadn't stopped liking these things. I'd just stopped expressing that I liked them because his preferences had overridden mine. But then I'd push the thought away because examining it too closely felt dangerous, like pulling on a thread that might unravel everything. I started noticing the imbalance in small ways. He'd complain about being tired, and I'd immediately adjust everything to accommodate his need for rest. But when I was tired, exhausted from managing everything and mentioned it, he'd barely acknowledge it, certainly wouldn't change anything about his behavior or routine to help lighten my load. The care only went one direction. I'd give and adjust and accommodate, and he'd receive and expect and take. Sometimes I'd get flashes of anger at the unfairness of it all, at doing all the work while he did none, at making myself smaller while he stayed exactly the same size he'd always been, at losing pieces of myself, my music, my food preferences, my opinions, my tone, my wants, while he lost nothing, sacrificed nothing, adjusted nothing. But the anger scared me because it pointed toward truths I wasn't ready to face, so I'd transform it into something else. Understanding, patience, acceptance. I caught myself making excuses to friends when they'd point out the imbalance. He's just not naturally thoughtful like that, I'd say, as if thoughtfulness was an innate trait some people had and others didn't, rather than a choice someone makes or doesn't make. He shows love differently, I'd explain, though I couldn't actually point to how he showed love when I thought about it honestly. The excuses were becoming harder to believe even as I kept saying them. My birthday was coming up and a friend asked me what I wanted to do, what would make me happy, how I wanted to celebrate. Simple questions. Normal questions. And I froze completely. I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out because I genuinely didn't know. I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked what I wanted, what I preferred, what would make me happy. The last time my wants had been centered in any decision. I'd gotten so used to accommodating him, to arranging everything around his comfort and his preferences and his moods, that I'd lost complete track of my own. I didn't know what made me happy anymore outside of making him comfortable. I couldn't name my favorite restaurant because I only went to his favorites. I couldn't suggest an activity because I only did what he wanted to do. My entire sense of self had been subsumed into the project of managing him. Sitting there unable to answer such a basic question about myself, I understood with sudden clarity what I'd done. I'd made myself invisible in my own life. I'd adapted so completely to his needs and his preferences and his comfort that I'd disappeared. My music was gone. My food preferences were gone. My opinions were silenced. My tone was modulated. my wants were erased. I'd become a supporting character whose only function was to make his life easier. And he never had to do any of this for me. Never had to manage my moods or accommodate my preferences or adjust his tone or silence his opinions or make himself smaller. He'd stayed exactly who he was while I'd transformed myself into someone whose entire purpose was facilitating his comfort. That wasn't partnership. That wasn't love. That was one person doing all the heavy lifting while the other one coasted on their effort. I needed to remember what I liked, what I wanted, who I was when I wasn't managing someone else's comfort. I needed to play my music loud, cook the foods I loved, share my opinions without fear, exist at my natural volume instead of at whatever level kept him comfortable. I needed to stop doing all the heavy lifting for someone who'd never once picked up their share. If you've adapted yourself so completely to someone else's comfort that you can't remember your own preferences anymore, you're not wrong for recognizing you've been carrying the entire relationship alone. Others have shared in the comments about the moment they realized they'd made themselves invisible. Sometimes naming it is the first step to becoming visible again. If this resonates, this space continues for those ready to stop doing all the heavy lifting.